let's do that. All right, so let's get started. So these are our personal statement tips. So they're not totally specific to the UC personal insight questions because I wanted it to be relevant to any other applications that you might be doing, but we will definitely be talking specifically about the personal insight questions. So the first tip is to keep it relevant. So I have been editing personal statements for students for the last few months. Students have been sending me their personal insight questions. They've been sending me their California State University EOP questions and common application personal statements and supplemental essays. And the one thing that I am really seeing that is really kind of disheartening because I feel bad having to tell students is students who write about something that's completely not relevant to who they are now. So obviously, yes, if something really big happened to you when you were younger, like maybe you immigrated from another country or you had a death in the family that really affected who you are now, that is totally okay to talk about it, but you don't need to go into all of the nitty-gritty details about that experience. You want to really focus on what's happening now and who you are now. So that's number one. Hopefully by now, those of you who are watching this webinar, I hope you've already at least drafted your essays. Hopefully you're not starting from scratch. So you want to look at your drafts and make sure that they're all addressing who you are now. If you're looking at your essays and you're like, oh man, this is really about who I was back in high school, who I was back in middle school or who I was back in elementary school, you want to shift it. Tell me about who you were in high school. Tell me about who you are now as a community college student. Okay, the other really important thing to do is hit the word limit. So for the UC Personal Insight questions, you have 350 words per prompt. So you have 4 prompts that you have to answer, and each one should get to 350 words. I think it's best to start with at like 400 or even 500 and cut down. If you're only at 200 words or you're below that, you need to add because it shows that you're not really putting, I mean, obviously you might be, but to me, when I read an essay that's only 200 words, it shows me that maybe you're kind of lazy, maybe you don't care that much. So actually getting to 350 or as close to 350 as possible, that just kind of shows that you care. And this is your one chance to really tell the school who you are. So you want to use as many words as possible. Below are the word limits for the other applications that you might have to do. Supplemental essays will vary. But for UCs, again, it's 350 for all 4. So each of your 4 is 350. So in total, you have about 1,300, 1,400? I can't do math, but 1,400 to 1,500 words total to explain yourself, so take advantage of that. Okay, so the next thing to do is to keep it simple. The number one thing I'm noticing when I'm editing students' essays is that they go on and on and on, and a sentence might be like 5 lines of your essay. That's not a sentence, right? That might be like 3 or 4 sentences actually. So keep it as simple as possible. My number one advice to students is to actually read your essay out loud, or even maybe have a friend or your sibling or anybody read it out loud to you so you can hear it. Because that's going to make you realize where you need a comma. It's going to make you realize when a sentence is too long. It's going to make you realize when you're using way too many fancy words that you wouldn't use in normal life. So you want to keep it simple. Try not to use details. I read a lot of essays that are like, I could smell the coffee in the kitchen as it infiltrated my lungs in the damp morning air. These readers are reading hundreds of essays, and think about it, every student has 4 essays that they have to read. They don't care about those details. Those details don't tell them who you are. We don't need to know that it was a sunny day in May. We don't need all of those details. So really keep it simple and get to the point. If you're using all of these words and this flowy stuff just to get to 350, then you're just wasting space. Keep it simple and use specific examples. So a lot of times students will say things like, I had struggles with time management and it was hard to do well in school, and then they just end it. that doesn't give me any examples. Give me some examples of why you struggle. Was it because maybe you had to juggle a whole bunch of different things, you had to work, you had to take care of your siblings, you had to make food? That gives some more context. You can't assume your reader knows anything. That also goes with abbreviations. A lot of students will say something like, I was part of SMASH at Stanford, and your reader has no idea what SMASH at Stanford is. They don't know that it's the Summer Math and Science Academy. So really go into detail about things that are important, but don't go into detail about things that aren't important. All right, another important thing is to answer the prompt. This may seem obvious, but as you're writing, you get really into what you're talking about, and you might not think about the prompt and the bigger picture that you're actually trying to address. So write out your drafts and then read them, and then go back to the prompt and say, did I answer this? Did I really analyze this and break it down enough? The prompts are pretty long. It's things like, tell me about a time you encountered a challenge, how did you overcome this challenge, and how did it affect your academic potential? That's a lot of things in once. So you're not going to answer that prompt with one sentence, right? You have to really break it down into chunks. So make sure your essay answers every part of that prompt. Our brainstorming worksheet on the Hub, if you haven't seen it, is really, really helpful in helping you break down and helping you make sure you answered every part of the prompt. So I'm going to take a quick second to show that to you. So if you go on the internet, step one, oops, that's my notes. Go on the internet, go to the Hub, SRA, collegetocareers.org. Once you're here, click high school students, and community college students, just click this too. It's really easy. Right over here on the right-hand side under websites to check out is our UC Personal Insight Questions Brainstorming Worksheet. That is a mouthful. Click that and it takes you to our article, which again, one more click takes you to our worksheet. But it has all of the prompts over here on the left-hand side and then different steps that break down the prompt. So if the prompt is to describe an example of your leadership experience, then we break it down. So you don't want to just say, like, I tutored students at my school. You want to really tell me the full story. Lots of students tutor. I need to know how this affected you. So we ask, have you shown leadership? Tell me the story of a time you influenced others. Were there any challenges? How did you address these challenges? And then the conclusion. That is so, so important. A lot of students are missing the conclusion. And that kind of drives me crazy because that's the whole point of it, right? Yes, you're going to tell a story, but how has this affected you? What did you learn from it? How has that experience shaped the person that you're going to be on this college campus? That's what should be back of mind the whole time. How am I going to bring this with me to college? How does this affect who I am now? That should be the main thing you're really thinking about. So, if you've got your drafts, even if you've already done this and you're like, Isabella, I don't need to brainstorm anymore, I want you to come on this sheet and look at, especially step 4, that's our conclusions column. That's really important. I see somebody on it now. I hope it's somebody watching this webinar. But just make sure you've got those conclusions. That's so key. And even if your conclusion is just 1 or 2 sentences, that's okay. But make sure you tie it all together. Don't just end it on like, and I tutored students, tell me more. All right, let's get back to my full screen. So answer the prompt. The next really important tip is to make sure you are using the 50-50 rule. So what that means is, and it doesn't have to be exact, but in general, 50% of your essay is telling me your story. So what happened? You tutored the students, you went over to their school every day after you got done with classes, you wrote a lesson, and then it has to be at least 50%, why does this matter and why is this important? So again, this kind of goes back to that, how does this relate to the person that you'll be in college? So that's where you tell me about what you learned. You learned to manage your time, you learned to be empathetic, you learned to be cognizant of younger people's abilities, you learned that you want to be a teacher. Whatever you learned from it, however it matters, that's what you should really be focusing on, because that's what they want to know, and that's what a lot of students aren't doing in their essays. They're not telling us why it matters. So when I read a student whose essays tells me why it matters, I'm like, yes, this person got it. That's the important part. That's what we want to see. Okay, the next step is to find editors. So this is really, really crucial. Even if you're like, yeah, I'm a great writer, you never know. It's really easy to do little things. You're looking at your essay so many times that you might totally miss something. I suggest having at least 2 editors, and I suggest having at least 1 peer. Not a lot of students do this, but I think it's important to have a peer or a friend, someone who knows you on like a normal level, someone you're not always trying to impress, like your teacher or your counselor. That can be really good. It can be a sibling, a cousin, just a younger person who knows you is important. And then a professional, so that's a tutor, a teacher, your parent maybe, whoever you want to read it, who can kind of look for typos and look for theme and story is important. One thing you want to avoid is having too many editors. So if you have too many people looking at it and too many people giving you suggestions, you're going to get totally overwhelmed, especially at this point in the game. At this point, you should just be having maybe 1 more person look it over and give you final feedback. You don't want someone totally telling you to rewrite it at this point. That's a little too stressful. And then always remember that no matter what people tell you, you don't have to take their suggestions. I remember once in high school, my English teacher looked over my essay and made so many corrections. And when I read it, I was like, I would never say this. I didn't even know a word she put in it. I remember the word. It was regale. And I was like, why would I ever say that? So you don't have to take their suggestions. It needs to be you. It needs to sound like you at the end of the day. So keep that in mind. You don't have to do everything that they tell you. And then again, I said this already, but read it aloud and make sure it sounds like you and it sounds personal and it really it comes from the heart. I know that sounds cheesy, but that's important. You don't want to sound like a robot, right? You want to stand out. This is like your one chance to really tell them who you are on the application. All right, so the other step, number 7, or tip number 7, is to not repeat. So what I mean by that is if you talk about something in your personal statement, maybe I talk about it in personal statement number 5, I shouldn't talk about it again in personal statement number 4. I saw one this morning where the student, her whole essay was about how she was a first-generation college student, and that was her challenge, but she overcame it by joining Avid. And then her next essay was about how she, I think it was like the how did you take advantage of a significant educational opportunity question. And then again, she talked about how she took advantage of Avid. And it was just the exact same essay, but with different words. I didn't learn anything new from her. That was an opportunity for her to tell me something new, and she didn't take it. So if you're kind of talking about the same thing in all of your essays, you might want to consider revising. I know it's late in the game, it can be stressful, but that's your 350-word opportunity to tell them who you are and give them some new information. So make sure everything's different. If you're going to talk about something in your activities and awards section, that's totally fine. Just make sure you're not repeating the exact same information again in your essay. The UC application has 2 additional comment sections. There's one right after all of the personal statements, and then there's one the personal insight questions, and then there's one right after the grades. You want to make sure that you're not using that as like a personal statement section continued. It has to be new information, and make sure it's relevant. Don't fill it in just to fill it in. But I had a student, she had 4 really great personal insight questions that answered and told me different parts of her, but it was still missing some information. I still wanted the reader to know that she was in foster care and she had kind of dealt with homelessness and she had to commute really far from school, and it didn't really fit in any of her personal insight questions. So that was the perfect opportunity to say like, hey, this is also part of me, and even though I didn't write about it, I want you to know about it. Or maybe you want to say like, in your after the grades section where you input your classes, you might want to say, I go to community college because I have to take care of my dad and there wasn't money for me to go to a 4-year college, but now this is my chance. That can go there. Or you can say something like, My high school only has 3 AP classes, and I couldn't take them because I had to go take this other class. That's like your one time to tell these readers why did you do the things you do, or why should they consider you? So take advantage of the additional comments. If you can't think of anything to say, don't fill in with like random fluff, but try to use it meaningfully if you do have something to say. And then finally, your letters of rec. These might be requested by UCs. We don't know. They'll kind of request them randomly from certain students. But make sure that when and if you do get asked to submit these, that you give your recommender a copy of your application and say, like, this is what I wrote. Please write something different so that the reader is seeing a different side of you. Okay, and then, I've been saying this the whole time, but basically this is your interview on paper. It's your one chance. You really have to talk about you. I know this is really hard to do. I hate doing that. I don't like talking about myself. I don't like when attention is on me. But this is your one chance to show these people why you belong at their school. So don't tell me about how awesome your brother is. Don't tell me about how hard your mom worked and how hard it's been for her to, deal with whatever. It has to be about you. If you're talking about like what you did in ASB and how you plan the school dance, don't say like, we fundraised and we decorated for prom and we did all this. It has to be I. What did you personally do? So use I statements. If you go through, like, circle all the times you said we, circle all the times you say my mom or whatever. And kind of realize it's okay to have it a few times, obviously, but if it's like 5 or more times in one essay, that's probably too much, and you're probably going to need to reword it a little bit so the emphasis is on you. And then finally, keep in mind that everyone has a story, so sometimes you're going to hear about students who are writing about really difficult or really challenging things that they've overcome, and you might be like, well, nothing's ever happened to me, I'm not worthy. That's okay, right? Everyone has their own story. Everyone's coming from their own background. So be really honest and true about who you are and just speak from the heart. They're not looking to fill a school with students who have overcome extreme obstacles, right? They need a whole wide variety of students. They want a little bit of everybody at their school. So think about that. Tell them why you're special and why you belong at that school. Okay, and then the last one, kind of cheesy, be a student rising above. So what we mean by that is to be really positive and show that no matter what's happened to you in your life, you're resilient, you're proud, you're going to work hard to overcome whatever is thrown your way. So you always want to talk about what you learned. You always want to tie it back to how whatever has happened to you is going to make you a stronger person and how it's going to relate to who you're going to be in college. You want to avoid words like if you're answering the essay about what your favorite subject is, you don't want to say like, I like math because English is boring, or I liked math up until I took AP calculus because that teacher didn't like me and I couldn't understand what she was saying. That's not a student I want at my campus, right? So you want to be really positive. Don't blame people. Don't complain. Try not to use words like tedious. I read one the other day where the student said something was like hella whatever. This is like your college essay, so try to be as professional as possible and polished. But again, stay true to who you are. So be positive, be a student rising above, and make sure that when you're reading your essays aloud, you're really feeling like they capture who you are. Don't over-edit to the point where it's boring. It's okay to have a couple typos here and there. Obviously, if you can avoid them, that's the goal. But it doesn't have to be 100% polished. All right, so let's take some Q&A questions. I'm going to put the post poll up so we can see if anyone learned anything. Hopefully you did. And if you have questions, type them in the Q&A box. We are but giving feedback and reviewing personal insight questions and personal statements on the Hub. If you want that, today's the last day to submit it in order to get a guaranteed response. The way to do that is by going onto the Hub, let's do it one more time, and clicking Email an SRA Advisor, and you can ask us nicely to review your personal insight questions, and we will do that. So you'll just click Email an SRA Advisor, on the left sidebar and we will review for you. But today's the last day for that. So if you want your essays reviewed, submit it ASAP so we can get back to you. And if there's any questions, you can type them in the Q&A box or post them on the hub and we will gladly get back to you. But otherwise, thank you, good luck. I know how stressful this is. I did the exact, well, when I applied, we only had to write 2 essays, but they were longer. But I know how overwhelming it is, how stressful it is. If you are applying to the UCs and the CSUs and then also private schools, like give yourself some time after you submit your UCs, just relax a little bit, decompress. You don't have to go straight into private schools. Take some time to kind of breathe. And it's all going to work out. You're going to, wherever you go, even if it's not your dream school, you're still going to find friends. You're still going to be happy there. So it'll all work out. Don't stress too much. All right, so let's just wait on one more person to take the poll, and then we'll wrap up. It doesn't look like there's any questions. So if you do have any, you can post them on the hub. You know how to find us. But I'll end it now. Thank you guys. Good luck. Talk to you later.